it's nice to actually have enough light for people to see their handouts if they want to look too long, but we do just want to make sure the screen is given its best chance.
Is that lighter or do you want it lighter?
That's perfect.
I think that's pretty good. I can see what I'm doing, and you'll all have the handouts to look at later. I wanted to call this the art of making anaglyphs, not to be artsy, but really just to underscore the point that for a lot of the issues with anaglyphs, there aren't hard, fast rules. With a lot of things in stereo, there are rules. You might break them, but with mounting stereo cards or slides, it makes a lot of sense to put the image behind the window for viewer comfort in most cases, or at least not to have something interrupted at the window. Anaglyphs are a different animal, and I think there is really an art to making them. They're not necessarily a whole bunch of strict rules you're going to get. There's just going to be different factors you consider, and you as an artist have to sit there and figure out what's making the most successful end result. I'm sure there's people who've made lots of anaglyphs here, and there might be also people who've never done one. I know when I went to the Dan Shelley's workshop a couple years ago, I had never made an anaglyph, and I just figured they were probably very complicated to make and were probably beyond my computer skills. So if you're a beginner, if you get nothing out of this workshop, then one fact I would want it to be that it's very easy to make anaglyphs. This is all an anaglyph is, and I cover this in the handout. If you have an image in RGB, which is red, green, blue, it's the common way that graphic software works with an image. It's just basically the color is divided, the image is divided into pixels that are putting those three colors out. If you take the left image and replace the red channel of the right image with the red channel of the left image, you have an anaglyph. I'll show this to you, but I was going to see if I could articulate it so it made sense. Here's what I wrote down. You have a single RGB image. The red channel contains the left image, and the green and blue channels contain the right image. Each eye sees the right image when the glasses are worn because the red lens is canceling out the green-blue right channel, and the red lens, the blue lens, is canceling out the red channel. So in other words, these colored glasses are in effect canceling things out. I like to make anaglyphs starting with the stereo pair. Now there are a lot of tutorials and a lot of people like to take separate images and work with them separately. I like to start with the pair because I tend to want to do a lot of work to the pair before I make the anaglyph. And it's actually kind of works out well that our workshop here is coming after the ones we had this afternoon. Boris showing us how to get things in registration, and Steve's nice workshop about how to get rid of dirt and dust and spots. Because I like to start with a pair that's in pretty good shape before I make the anaglyph, and especially a pair that's properly set for rotation. Because it's very uncomfortable for your eyes to look at an anaglyph that's, it's confusing. It's the same thing as looking at a stereo pair that's out of registration. Photoshop, if you're not familiar with it, lets you put a grid up just by doing View, Select Grid. And you can see I've gone into this pair and carefully, this is a Keystone view card I scanned, but I've just made sure that things are lined up. And the techniques Boris showed earlier are really nice for that, where you can layer the image over itself in Photoshop to correct rotational problems. But the basic idea is you want to start with a nice stereo pair. All I'm going to do is just literally move the left red channel over the right red channel. See this window channels? Now different graphic software will let you do this in different ways, but it is always basically the same thing. I want to only work with the red channel, but I want to see the blue and green channels. I'm seeing all three of these. That's what these icons are showing me. That I can see the whole red, green, blue pattern, but I'm only working on the red. The red is the one that's highlighted. I've selected it. I'm going to my Move tool. And this, you want to put your glasses on. Watch what happens as I move this over. The right side is in 3D. And that's it. That's an anaglyph. However, there is more to talk about, but I'm up to 100%. But that's it. And if I was just sort of doing my normal process of making an anaglyph of an image, I would take it to this point. Then I would probably take my glasses off, consider how I want to place this red channel, and then crop it. Now what I'm doing with this red channel is a very big topic, and it's something I'm going to have a couple of thoughts about. But what I've just done is basically making an anaglyph. That's it. I've just replaced that red channel with the left image over the right image of the green blue, and that's it. It's done. If I do a crop at this point, if I just go up and say crop, I'll get rid of all the image crop. I'll get rid of all the sort of leftover junk, and there it is. Now what you do with this red channel is a very big deal. People often refer to it as setting the window, because that is basically what you're doing. You're setting where the left channel is versus the right channel. But the way I look at anaglyphs, I don't even like to use the word window, because I don't think the concept of the window is very valuable in making anaglyphs. In fact, I think it creates a lot of trouble. The term I tend to use is channel convergence. In other words, I'm converging the channels, and I'll just make sure I'm covering what I put in my handout. If you were to merge these channels with the nearest object exactly superimposed, that would be the same thing as mounting to the window. I'm going to open up another image to show you what I mean. Here's a nice pair, and I'm starting with some views I've scanned from Keystone view cards, which are a wonderful source for image material because there's so much detail in these. This is a view of the Great Wall of China. I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. I'm going to make an anaglyph out of it. And I'm going to start by positioning the red channel so I have the same window that Keystone used when they made their card, which is pretty easy to do. What I'm doing is selecting the left side, making sure only the red channel is active, and moving it over here. Does that process make sense? Have I explained at least that part of it? I mean, if anything I'm going over is unclear, I hope no one will hesitate to say. So anyway, here we have an anaglyph, and I'm going to discuss the things that I consider in positioning this red channel, in effect setting the window, if you want to say. There's a couple different things you can think about, and as I say, I consider putting stuff behind the window to be the last thing I'm going to think about. In fact, I never think about it. Here's what I made a list on the second page of the things that I usually consider when figuring out what to do with this channel. I'm going to start by just positioning it. If I was using automated software that made an anaglyph, basically without any user input, this is pretty much what it would do. It would put the whole image behind the window, and if you look at it through the glasses, you are indeed seeing everything's behind the window. If you take the glasses off, you'll notice that the farther back you get, the more fringing there is, the more deviation. In an anaglyph, since you're layering the left and the right side over each other, you're actually seeing the stereo deviation. It's visible as this fringing. These are the channels not agreeing with each other. A lot of times I find I get the best results making an anaglyph if I just average out the amount of deviation. In other words, you can see that the closer objects, the fringing basically depends, the fringing varies. It's a hard thing to articulate, but the fringing will vary depending on whether the left side is deviating over to one side or the right side. What I'll find to often prevent ghosting, or at least eliminate ghosting, reduce it, is to just position this. And what I'm doing now is using the move channel, and this is probably something you want to look at without glasses on. I'm observing the amount of fringing in this view, and I'm just shifting this around until I sort of even it out. What I'm hoping to have happen is to notice how the mountains in the back are now have much less fringing, and the guy in the front has a little bit of fringing too. But nothing in this view right now is very heavily fringed, and I find it much more comfortable to look at, especially if I increase the magnification to 100%. What I've done is pretty much compromised with the view. You'll notice that in the front, there's blue fringing on the right side of this guy. Technically, he's through the window if you're looking at things that way. But what I've done is taken the best advantage. The problem with anaglyphs is basically these glasses do not perfectly cancel out your channels. And my conclusion has been, rather than to bring my hands over how awful this is, the approach that I like to take is just to figure out the best way to get good results in spite of the fact that my channels aren't being perfectly canceled. And incidentally, you have the same problem with polarized projection with stereo jets. Really anything that you're viewing through glasses, anything other than stereo slides in a viewer or a stereo card, you have some lack of cancellation of the channels. So anyway, that's one way of doing it. And what's interesting about anaglyphs when you're using software this way is you can just sit here and just by moving, what I'm doing here is moving the red channel, and you can just watch the fringing change. And it's sort of interesting to watch it in glasses, because technically you're actually watching the window being shifted, the position of the image. Notice if I, and it's most helpful to do it, I'm going to mount this thing sort of to the window. you see those mountains in the background really have quite a bit of ghosting to them when I do it this way. And the farther back I go, the more ghosting I'm seeing with this mounted to the window. The wall especially, which has a lot of contrast in it, is fringing pretty heavily. And it's also worth pointing out that if I was to print this, this would be even more of a problem. Backlit display like a computer or a digital projection is actually one of the most forgiving ways to look at an anaglyph. Question?
Yeah, I'm just curious because I'm not seeing that ghosting.
Yeah, you're not seeing a lot of ghosting. I'll have other examples that will show you better. It is there. It's basically just a strange quality to the edge of the mountains, which will improve if I do this. And you're right, because it's sort of a more forgiving medium. A lot of what I'm saying is more important when you're doing prints, because prints are going to tend to be a lot less forgiving for ghosting issues. And I have some other examples of views that will show some of these problems a little bit better. This one I picked out specifically because I thought it was a nice way of showing the concept of averaging out the amount of deviation, of having, instead of having the back really heavily fringed and the front fused, finding sort of a midpoint. But you're right, there isn't a lot of ghosting in this one. I'll come up, I have something that's a better example of that problem, which I'll open up now. Okay. Now here's an interesting example. I kind of dug through my Tour of the World set. This is a nice view, and what's interesting about this view, why it's relevant, is it has a very contrasty subject pretty far back in the image. So I'll start by just making my regular old anaglyph, selecting the left side, selecting the move tool, and I'm going to start by setting this behind the window. Now I'm only looking at the red channel now, which is why it's doing that. I'll get all three channels up. So here it is. I think if I move this over, you'll see a little bit of ghosting here. Take a look at the boat. And even, you know, it's funny, even in this case, now this would look terrible as a print, but it's not that horrible when seen on a digital projector. However, there is, I'll show you where some of the ghosting is. Even these little icebergs where you have this high contrast between the water and the ice. Everything's pretty way far behind the window here. And the boat, if you look at it closely, you'll see that there is this quality of the color not really being solid. It's kind of flashing. The eye just kind of knows something's not quite right. If you take the glasses off, you'll see that what we have is a lot of deviation from this thing being so far back. So in my list of factors to consider, one of the factors that I'll consider is converging the channels on the area with the most contrast. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to move this red channel over until I'm getting much more of a convergence on the big black boat against the harsh white background.
It's very visible on the foreground when you do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what? This is what happens a lot of times with anaglyphs, is you end up kind of in a bargaining session with the image. You know, you're looking at the items of high contrast, and there might be one in the front and one in the back. And this is once again where it's the art of anaglyphs and not the rules. There's not a rule of where you position, at least the way I see it, there's not a rule. Here's where I position the red channel, the left channel, to get the best results. Every view is different. Every view has sort of different sets of problems. But I find the three factors I'm covering really do tend to help me get results I like pretty quickly. This would look even okay as a print. Because basically, as you can see, what I've done is I've gotten rid of the ghosting by just giving up, in a sense. I've just gone right to the highest contrast object, and that's what I fused on. Okay, so I'll show you what the third factor I consider in positioning this channel is. And that's, if all else is equal, a lot of times it's very nice to converge on the main subject. Here's another one of these beautiful Keystone cards. And what that does, you'll notice that as you move the convergence, when you have the left and right channels equal on something, in effect being at the window if it was a slide, you get pretty much a normal picture. The fringing exists when something is either behind or in front. So I'll start this one here. Once again, selecting my red channel, move it over, make my little anaglyph. I love this picture. It's the sort of thing that I would spend $5 on happily in someone's room. I ran into it. This one looks okay even as it is, because you know one of the reasons why it looks quite good is that we have the good luck of a foggy background, so that bridge in the background doesn't have a lot of contrast, and it tends to fuse quite nicely, even through glasses. However, there's a little bit of ghosting. I don't know if you even call the term ghosting. I don't know what the best thing to call it is, but I'm not entirely happy with the way these guys look in front, or I think they could look better. And since they're the main subject, and since I don't have a lot of contrast in here, I'm going to try actually fusing in on them, on the three Scotsmen there. And what that does is it lets you create, and this is something that Boris has kind of, a theory he's espoused, which I think there's a lot of validity to. When you can, it's nice to make an anaglyph that looks good as a regular print without glasses, or at least it's a factor that's nice to consider. This print, someone who didn't even know what 3D is probably wouldn't even notice there was anything unusual about it. Now, I might not have converged the channel this way if there were other factors going on, such as if it wasn't a foggy day, this could be causing quite a lot of ghosting in the background if we had a very dark bridge against a white background. So those three things are what I consider in placing the red channel. And I think just that process of putting the red channel in a logical place solves a lot of the problems that make people hate anaglyphs. Question?
I just want to ask you, the Keystone stereo views curved?
Yeah, they weren't curved when I put 10 books on top of my scanner to flatten them, but they are otherwise.
That's
That's how I do it, yeah. Yes?
What about trying to get the best of both worlds, and since you're in Photoshop anyway, altering the background, giving it that foggy feel?
I do that. In fact, that was something I was going to cover. That's a very good point, and that is something I'll talk about later. Is a lot of times when you're working on an anaglyph, you will get to things that are just unsolvable problems, really big contrasty things in the background. And Photoshop will let you cheat all kinds of ways. You can create this sort of a foggy appearance, and that is sometimes a very nice strategy. Yep?
I have a silly question. I didn't see you take the red channel out to the right side.
Oh, well, watch this. That's where it's nice to have the Photoshop history. I can prove to you that I did it.
Okay,
No, but
so
I
if
did.
I
I
missed
did.
it, that's
No, I
okay.
did. I did. I did the
That's
same.
fine. I just didn't.
Yeah, no, I did. This
Okay.
is here it is. I've gone back to the opening.
Okay.
Yeah, I make them the same way every time. And this isn't to say that this doesn't mean that the other tutorials you might see that involve opening two separate images are any less valid. This is just the method I like to work with, and I also wanted to show it just because I think for a beginner this is the most obvious way of seeing what's happening. Whereas I think it can be confusing when you get into too many issues of layers and multiple channels. The most important thing to know is that it's really pretty easy to make these. As long as you can move that red channel around somehow, you can make an anaglyph. So that's pretty much it. And if all we were doing was making black and white anaglyphs, we could all go home. But I'm really fond of color anaglyphs, and I know a lot of people just desaturate their images, take all the color out of them, and make an anaglyph that way. But I think that anaglyphs can be a wonderful way to display color. It's just that you have to deal with a kind of a paradox, which is that you're looking at this color image through colored lenses, and of course the colors are going to interact. So I will open up an image that's really a little vexing about that. And I have a bunch of these. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to take a little aside. One of the reasons I love anaglyphs is that they're a really nice way to get lots of detail in an image. I had showed a card earlier of a card driving through redwood. Here's the card scanned at 600 dpi and blown up. And it's just wonderful how much detail there is in these old cards, and anaglyphs are a wonderful way of conveying this. As you can see, if I wanted to, I could make a poster-sized print of this card, and there'd be all kinds of stuff to look at and little things to wander around. So I encourage people, if you're scanning your cards, don't just do it at 300 dpi. If you have a nice sharp Keystone card, they were contact printed. There's lots of wonderful detail. Go for 600. It might be a lot of file to work with. It might be a big file, but you can make wonderful big prints. I have an 8x10 of that particular image somewhere. Okay, color anaglyphs. We had to do it. If you look at this through glasses, you can see that we're in trouble already before you even make the anaglyph. It's basically flashing, isn't it? Let me see what I said on my nifty little sheet. What you're seeing is retinal rivalry. When you're viewing a color anaglyph, each eye is seeing either one or two of these composite color channels of the red, green, blue. So what will explain this rivalry is if I just look at these individual channels, because all the red, green, and blue are is basically they're three black and white images that just have the different intensities of the colors. Here's what this fire truck looks like in the red channel. Here's what it looks like in the blue channel. Here's what it looks like in the green. So you can see why you'd be seeing some flashing between those two channels if we're talking about something that's black here and something that's white here. Now if I, it's actually this kind of an interesting example of what's going on here. If I go in, select all my channels, and desaturate it, in other words, if I make this into a black and white image, guess what? All three channels are the same. In other words, I've averaged this out. So that's why turning a color image into black and white, I'm going to undo that. Turning a color image into a black and white image does get rid of the problems of these color flashings, because you basically evened out the channels. So in order to make a nice color anaglyph that still has the colors in, what your goal basically is to try to eliminate this flashing, this rivalry between these color channels, but still keep as much of the color material in there as you can. Now there's a couple of ways people do this that are worth mentioning. Sometimes people will just partially desaturate the image, or try to leave part of the color in. I know of people who get very nice results trying to desaturate. They might only desaturate the fire truck but leave the rest of the image in. This is once again why this is the art of anaglyph making. There isn't any set way that's the best way to do it, but I am going to show the approach that I really like. This is based on stuff Dan Shelley came up with. And I've created a step-by-step instruction list for anyone who wants to try this. It's oriented around Photoshop, but I think it would basically work in other software. I'm just going to go through these steps. You'll be able to see what they are, and then we can do a whole bunch of these if people are curious to do them. The first step that I'm going to do, well, the first step is starting with a nice, properly aligned pair in RGB. In other words, do what we had in our first workshops today. Get the thing aligned, get rid of any grunge or dirt in it. Duplicate the layer. If you're not familiar with Photoshop, what I like to do is call this layer full color, because it's going to be the layer, it's going to go on top of the background layer, and this is the layer that I'm not going to mess with the colors on. The layers in Photoshop can be compared to pieces of acetate. In other words, to clear sheets, or sheets that can be made clear or not clear. It's basically the image layered over itself, and you can either you can make the one transparent, you can cut pieces of one and leave pieces of the other underneath it, but they are literally just layers. They act like layers in the software. Now, the answer that since we saw that the reason why this thing is going to make a painful anaglyph to look at first is because these three channels look so different, I'm going to do what technically would be called channel mixing. I'm going to try to, on this bottom layer, I'm leaving my top layer alone. The bottom layer, I'm going to mess with these channels to try to keep some of the color in, but get rid of this great disagreement between how the blue channel and green channel look and the red channel. I'm just going to go through step by step from my instructions because I want to make sure I've explained this clearly here. This is step 2 we're talking here. All right, we're only working on the background layer now. We have the channels window visible. I'm going to select all the channels, which is what I have here. They're all selected. I'm going to copy them. Now I'm going to select only the blue channel, and I'm going to paste what I've just copied into it. So in effect, I've just made the blue channel an average of everything. And you notice the blue channel is now neither the dark black it was before or the bright color of the red channel. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is select the red and the green channels. Now this is one of these things where if you don't understand it but can follow the instructions, you'll be fine. It'll start to make sense eventually, but it's certainly something you can do just step by step from the instructions. I've now selected the red and the green channels. I'm going to copy them, and then I'm going to paste them under the green channel. So the green channel is now an average of the red and green channels. So if I look at this image with all three layers, look what I have. It is a color image, but it's kind of a strange color image. However, with my glasses on, the flashing is much less severe. Now, this is a matter of taste, but for myself looking at it, I'm actually going to even desaturate this pair just a little bit more before I start working. And this is, oops, I want to desaturate it. I'm just going to take a little bit of this saturation down, and the way I'm judging how to do that is just by looking at this with the glasses and getting a sense of how strong these colors are. Because this layer here is my solution to problems. It's not going to be the entire image at all. It's just going to be what I use bits and pieces of to solve my problems here. So at this point, what I have is two layers. I have my full color pair, and I have my, I call it corrected color. One approach you can use, and this is kind of what Dan does, is right at this stage you can just start varying the opacity. In other words, I'm going to make my top layer less opaque, so some of the bottom layer is shining through. And watch as I do that. You can see how the color slowly transforms from one to the other. But you know what? I'm going to make the anaglyph right now, because that's what we're going to do at this stage. And one of the reasons for this process I've come up with is it's letting me only have you'll notice the red channel is the same between these two images. It's pretty much the same. When I make the anaglyph, I'll just be able to paste the red channel onto the bottom layer, and I won't have to worry about positioning it any further. This will make more sense after you see me do it. It's one of these things I can tell that it's probably sounding a little strange to some of you. But I'm going to select. I'm basically doing the exact same thing I've done in all these black and white images. I'm working on my top layer, which I call full color. And I'm just making an anaglyph, and it's going to be hard to look at. It is in 3D, but this is not an anaglyph I would want to send anyone right here. I'm going to use the same issues that I talked about earlier to decide how to fuse this. In other words, where to position the red channel. And in this case, I'm really lucky because the main subject, the guy in the fire truck, just also happens to be pretty much in the middle. So I'm just going to pretty much position the thing on him. And once again, this is a matter of opinion. And it's also a matter where you might make the anaglyph and come back the next day and decide to change it. Now the next step I have in my set of instructions is to crop at this stage. Crop. In other words, I'm just getting rid of the rest of it. So all I have is this anaglyph. So what I have at this point right now is I have this anaglyph that's full color on the top, and then I have that nice corrected color image on the bottom, but all I have is the right channel of it. So this is step 4. I have the red channel selected. I'm going to press copy. I'm going to go to my second layer, go to my channels window, make sure only the red is selected, and press paste. So what I have now here on my bottom layer is an anaglyph, but an anaglyph that isn't flashing all over the place. That doesn't have quite that annoying quality to it. Now this is a matter of taste. Some of you might want to actually desaturate this even further before making the anaglyph. For my personal taste, I don't mind this amount of rivalry. It's worth it to have that amount of color red. So here's how I'm going to finish this thing. I now have both layers active, and this becomes a matter of judgment, as most of this process is. First, I'm going to think about just the overall colors of the image. You'll notice the grass, even though it's green, it's not a green that tends to flash a lot. It's not really bothering me. And there's a lot of other nice colors in here. There's the blue of the cars. The only thing that's really bugging me in this image is this fire truck. So I'm going to slightly lower the opacity. If I was to lower the opacity of this layer really low, I could almost kind of average out all the colors of it. But in a sense, all I would have done then would have just been desaturated the image. What I like to do is use the eraser tool at this stage and start erasing the colors that are annoying me. Photoshop, I'm literally erasing the stuff in the top layer, and the eraser acts just like an eraser. It eliminates it so you see what's underneath it. What I often do before I do this, and I put this in the instructions, is I'll often duplicate this color anaglyph layer and just call it spare full color. And I don't even want to see it. It's just there because I'm going to start erasing stuff. I might change my mind later. And if I change my mind after I've closed the file and reopened it, I have no way of getting stuff back. So that's just sitting there, and I'm not even going to do anything with it. And here's where I'm going to finish the anaglyph. So I'm going to take the erase tool. I've set the opacity for about 50%, which means that the eraser tool isn't fully erasing what's on the layer. Just watch what happens as I go over. Make sure all the channels are selected. This you do to all the channels at once. And can you see what I'm doing here? I'm actually just looking for stuff that's flashing. I'm just kind of getting rid of it. And this I just find so much fun, I could sit around and do this all day. Your mileage may vary. I don't know if you'll find it fun or not, but I really enjoy doing this. And you can see, one of the things that I really like about this approach versus other solutions to anaglyphs where you do work to the pair and then make the anaglyph, is that with this you can actually see what you're getting through the glasses. I'm correcting these colors while I'm looking at the final result. And each time I click on the eraser, each time I use the tool again, it further erases the material. You can see it hasn't taken me too long. I'm getting close to where I'm pretty happy with what I have here. And you can see what I have. If you take the glasses off, all right, I'm going to look a little bit more at the LCD. It's pretty much still a color picture. And you know what's sort of interesting is I can go in now and click on this and you can see what I started with. So what I've done is just gotten rid of all this rivalry but kept all the other stuff I wanted. And this I think will explain a bit what I've done. If I get rid of the background layer so you see only this, you can see what I have on top. Basically an erased version of the color anaglyph. Would you like to see another one? Okay, yeah, I'll do some more. And now, as I say, there are numerous approaches to doing this. And I might later, if there's time, do exactly what Dan Shelley has done with his, where he actually takes 3 layers and has the bottom one be entirely black and white. The thing I like about this is I've set this up in 6 steps, and you can do it in 6 steps. I can do these very quickly. In fact, I'll try to prove that by doing a couple very quickly. Let's see what my next example is. And I tried to pick images that had vexing colors in them. And here's a real pain in the neck. This was my Christmas card image. And I actually brought the, this is one of the things I like to do with anaglyphs, is I can make Christmas cards and send out to people. Try doing that with Realist Slide. I don't have, one of the joys of the anaglyph is that all I need is this 50-cent pair of glasses, and almost anyone I know can view stereo with it. So these are my daughters. This was the image I used for the Christmas card I sent out this year. And so I'll just go through these processes and just stop me if anything's unclear, or if you have any questions about anything. I'm going to start by duplicating the layer and calling it full color. I'm going to go to this bottom layer and mix the channels up to try to get rid of the rivalry. And this one is, if you put the glasses on, you'll see this is hopeless. I mean, when you initially look at it, you just sort of want to desaturate it. Take a look at what the individual channels look like. The red channel, the older girl Beverly's shirt is nice bright red, and the blue channel, she might as well be wearing a black. You know, you can see there's just very severe differences between the colors, and it seems that any time I photograph my kids, they like to wear bright red or bright blue. Dad makes anaglyphs. So I'm going to mix these channels, and there's any number of ways you can mix the channels. The ones that I've come up with, I just have found to work very nicely for my purposes, for this method of layering things and erasing them. But I might show some others after I do this one. So I've copied all the channels, pasted them on the blue. The blue is now an average of the 2 of them. I go to the red and green channel, copy, paste to the green. So let's look at the composite. This is the corrected color version of that image. Now what's interesting, and this is really sort of interesting, just look at the science of color. I've totally destroyed the color yellow in here. Fortunately, it doesn't matter because I'm not going to use that part of the view in the final composite. And I'm looking at this, and for my taste, it's still a little bit flashy. So I'm going to go into it. In other words, it's just there's still some rivalry, even with that much correction. I'm going to just slightly desaturate it. Now you can play with saturation and hues and things like that when you're working on the stereo pair. You must never do it once you have the finished anaglyph, unless you want to ruin it. And so there is a lot of work that you need to do at the stage of the stereo pair. But like I said, this whole process I'm showing here, I like because I can do most of my final work while looking at the anaglyph through the glasses. Now for this image, since I know it's such a bear, in other words, the reds are so strong, I'm going to add an extra step. I'm going to copy, I've just slightly lowered the saturation of the bottom layer. I'm going to copy that red channel and paste it into the red channel of the top layer. There might be some other way to just partially desaturate only one of the color channels, but I don't know what it is. This isn't a very extreme change, it's just a subtle, I've just made the red slightly less extreme even in the top channel. Okay, my next step is that I make the anaglyph. That's done to the full color layer. If you guys want to see a bad anaglyph, here it comes. Red channel only selected. Once again, I'm thinking about these factors, and having worked with this image a lot, I know that it worked out very nicely when I just pretty much fused on the faces. And also, this was a case where I did need to fuse on the main subject matter because my wife wouldn't have let me send out a Christmas card that looked too different from a real picture. One of the things I like to do with anaglyphs is just slightly move this red channel over a little bit so that the faces seem out of focus without the glasses on. It just looks like kind of a blurry picture, and then you put the glasses on, suddenly they snap into focus. All right, so I'm going to crop. And just so you see what I have before I crop, basically I have this stereo pair that has the red channel missing on one side. It looks kind of bizarre. Crop. So I've cropped it. All I have is this awful anaglyph. I'm going to take the red channel of the top one, the anaglyph, select the bottom layer. And this is actually sort of interesting to only look at the red channel of the bottom layer that I'm about to paste onto. You'll notice, you'll see the perspective shift as it shifts to it's now showing the left image. So in a sense, you're sort of seeing a stereo animation as I put that red channel in. And once again, here I have my muted color lower layer. And I'm happy with that. I'll live with it, I guess is what I would say. I'd probably fiddle around with it further if I was actually making the Christmas card. But now I'm once again going to look at varying my opacity. I'm now looking at my top layer. And notice as I make this less opacity, you can actually see the colors becoming more viewable through the glasses. But once again, as with the fire truck, most of this image looks just fine in color. The only real problem is this red shirt and some of the blue shirt. But the rest of it, the colors, you'll notice that in anaglyphs, purple and yellow and brown are really nice colors that work fine all the time. So if you have a choice, get someone to wear a yellow shirt. But I've never managed that. So once again, I'm starting with my eraser, and this is something you can experiment with. But I do really like to use about a 50% opacity, and I like to use a brush that has a fuzzy diameter. In other words, it's what you would call a soft brush. And in general, you could say that what I'm doing here is cheating. I'm erasing bits of the color. I'm in a sense, trying to fool the viewer. So I find using a lower opacity and using a softer brush helps make my mischief less objectionable. And I'll just sit here and play with this for a couple of minutes until I'm happy with the amount of rivalry versus the amount of color I get. And this is the case for using this technique where you really do get to be the artist. You get to decide at what point, how much color do you want to keep in. I can certainly see where some people might prefer just to only change the opacity and not go in and touch individual colors like this, because in a sense I am changing what the image is. But I prefer doing this. First of all, I use Provia, so my reds have nothing to do with reality anyway, so I might as well change them. Now I'll just work on this for another minute and let me show a couple of other issues with the anaglyph. Now this red shirt is such a pain. I'm probably going to use a stronger brush and almost eliminate it from this layer. And a lot of times as you work with stronger brushes, you want to make them smaller. As I say, what I like about this so much is that I'm making these corrections while I'm looking at the anaglyph through the glasses. So I'm really able to see what I'm doing. And just to review, this is what my top layer looks like. Now, if I was making a print, I happen to know that Beverly's lips here are also a little bit, it doesn't really bother you too much at this size, but when I made the card originally, I actually went in and just did a little bit of this under the lips here and some of that. Now, once this is done, what I have are these two layers. If I want to print it, or if I want to further work on the image, I'm going to want to flatten it. In other words, I'm going to turn these two layers and merge them into one. And at this point, before doing that, I can still fiddle with the opacity, just sort of decide, is there anything else I want to change? And very often, if I'm working on something that I'm going to be making a print out of, I'll want to save the file in this form before I flatten it, because I might very well want to come back later and change my mind or change what I've done. So a lot of times, if I'm working on an anaglyph, I'll save the pair that I've started with. Then I'll save this multi-layered thing that I can go back and adjust further. And then I'll save the final image that I flattened. Flattening, in other words, I just go to the layer page, flatten the image. It's now a single layer. Now, as usually happens with the anaglyphs, you can see there's some fringing on either side where there was material in one channel but not in the other. So I'm just going to do the quick trick of selecting only the stuff I want to keep and cropping. Now at this stage, with anaglyphs, as long as you're working on all three channels, you can adjust contrast. You can do sharpening. And I'll show you what I mean. And very often you end up finding, as you're looking at the finished results, that you do want to fiddle around a little bit with the contrast. It doesn't hurt anything. I guess the most important point is it doesn't hurt the anaglyph. It's still an anaglyph. Your colors and everything are still fine if you play with brightness and contrast, as long as you're doing it on all three channels. You actually could even individually change channels if you wanted to, but that would change the color of the anaglyph. And then you can also do sharpening. And I find that I really like to put a little bit of extra sharpening on an anaglyph. I tend to sharpen them more than I might a stereo card. So there you have it. And without the glasses on, you can see it's a color picture. The colors are muted, some of them, but especially the red shirt. But I have still been able to convey the fact that they were wearing red and blue. I have the Christmas card here somewhere. I think you can see what the final result was. I also put other graphics on it. But I've gotten a lot of people who've probably never seen 3D or really thought about it, interested in it. Maybe they're not out shooting 3D, but at least they're aware of it. Just family and friends who get these cards from me every year. Okay, how are we doing on time? Well, we have a little more time. Yep. Okay. Well, I have an image that was really difficult for colors. I did sort of pick some of my least favorites, most difficult colors to render. I'm going to go a little bit further into some other channel mixing stuff. Basically, I thought what I would do is show what Dan Shelley's 3-layer technique is. Because what I put here was basically my attempt to come up with a shortcut for that. The reason that I wanted to find some way to do these anaglyphs with 2 layers is that every time that I've tried to show people the 3-layer version, the concept of layering 3 anaglyphs and varying the opacity and all that, their eyes seemed to glaze over, and I had the feeling no one ever actually wanted to try it because it seemed too complex. But I will try one here, because a lot of this is a matter of taste, and you might find that you prefer the results you get from using what would be called the true color anaglyph. That's where you paste the red channel into the green. I'll show you what I mean. For doing the 3-layer anaglyph, you literally make 3 layers. First layer is full color. This is a shot from the Broadway show Hairspray. I happened to be at the rehearsals and was able to do it. I normally don't recommend taking images at Broadway shows unless you're at a rehearsal. Duplicate layer, but this had some really harsh colors. Now, true color is a term just referring to a specific kind of channel mixing. I hope I'm explaining it correctly. You might recall the channel mixing that I've been doing in the little process I have in my instruction sheets. For this 3-layer anaglyph, I'm going to go to my bottom layer and just make it black and white. I'm going to go to this layer, my middle layer, true color. True color is, once again, we have this problem of, look at how different these different channels are. And this is a really interesting image because there's stuff that you only see in the blue channel. Notice the lights on the building in the background. They literally don't show up at all in the red channel. In the blue channel, there they are. It's just whatever the science of it is, that particular shade of blue really only exists in that one channel. I'm going to take my red channel, copy it, and paste it to my green channel. This looks pretty strange, but you do have something that has almost no flashing when you look at the glasses. Obviously, the only way you would want to use this would be as just an ingredient, as a tool. I don't think this is an image I'd want to look at as a final product. And then, once again, I have full color. Now, the problem with doing more than 2 layers, one of the steps that I saved before in the sort of shortcut I came up with the two-layer method, is that I didn't really have to think too much about where this red channel was positioned on the two layers. I just copied it on the one and pasted it to the other. In this case, you're going to make 3 separate anaglyphs, and you're going to have to make sure the red channels match. So I'll just do it, and we'll see how it looks. And as always, it's always the same thing to start with. Making the anaglyph is the same process of grabbing the left side, only the red channel. Actually, let me just look at this. Oh, you know what? This actually brings up an interesting point. If you're making anaglyphs, make sure you know which your left channel is. If you're scanning film right off a Sputnik or a realist, very often your left side ends up on the right side of the pair. And that's the case in this one. This is just a cross-eyed view. So I'm glad I thought of that before I did this. It's a little strange to have a pseudo anaglyph. So you'll just have to take my word that I'm working on the left channel, even though it happens to be on the right side. And then once again, I'm going to sort of think about how I want to position the anaglyph here. And the problem that I have is that I'm going to have to do this 3 times because I'm making 3 layers. But you'll see that there's sort of a trade-off to this. I get a lot more flexibility for having done that. So here's my first anaglyph. Now I'm going to go to the true color layer, and it's the exact same process. I'm going to make an anaglyph that's a, quote, true color anaglyph. And it really is amazing that you don't have this rivalry anymore when you paste the red over the green, but you can also see that reds and greens have been completely destroyed. This is Harvey Fierstein playing Edna Turnblad. All right, and then I'm going to go to my third layer, which is desaturated. And you'll notice, of course, that I have no problems at all in terms of colors here. I'm just going to take my red channel. I have a nice black and white anaglyph. And actually, if I'm doing this, I usually end up deciding my convergence based on the black and white one because it's just easier. It's easier to figure out where it should go here, as I'm not being distracted by all these colors. So I'm just sort of looking at my main subject is Harvey. I'd like to have it as much focused on him, but there's enough depth in this image that I'm kind of probably end up sort of compromising, kind of moving it halfway over. That's just what I would do. All right, now the problem I have is I'm going to have to make sure my red channel is positioned identically on all 3 layers. So I'm going up to 100%. I'm actually looking as detailed as I can. I'm going to my next layer. I only want to look at the red channel here. And I'm just going to have to use the move tool, position it so it's the same as the other one. And you can see it is. Now look how different they look. You know, this is the difference between a black and white and a color. And then on this one here, I'm going to just do the same thing. Only look at the red channel. Just position it so it matches. Just like dancing. Here we go. Okay, so now what I have here is 3 separate anaglyphs. This really is a pretty amazing process. I just was reluctant to have it be the main thing I taught because, as I say, I think most people, this is very time-consuming, and it's especially if you're working with a huge file. But it really is pretty neat. Here's the black and white anaglyph. Here's the true color. Here's the full color. And I can do amazing things just by varying the opacity of these 3 layers. For example, I can go to this true color layer, and I'm going to probably make it a very low opacity. So in a sense, all it is just a slightly colorized black and white layer. Then I'm going to go to this full color layer, and here's where I'm really going to fiddle around a bit. And for this particular image, I'm still going to want to erase some things, because especially this ribbon on Harvey's dress, there's a couple things that are just very strong colors. But you can see this is actually giving me a lot of flexibility, because I have this other, I have the black and white, the color, and this sort of corrected color all existing at the same time. And let once again, I'm just going to take my little eraser brush and use my own judgment to get rid of things that I think are annoying. And you know, this is something you can kill lots of time with if you want to. But after you get used to it, it can really be done very quickly. And I hope that you'll see that making color anaglyphs isn't necessarily this horrible process that, you know, is too complicated. It really is, once you get used to it, it's really just kind of another little thing you do with your computer. And it really is possible to very quickly turn most of the color images you have into nice anaglyphs. And so you can see there's quite a lot of flashing on this red dress back here. All this is a matter of judgment, the way you're mixing the colors. And actually, we have someone here who's made some color anaglyphs that I think are amazing. Is Simon still here? What do you do? Because you had posted on the photo list. Are you using channel mixing, or how are you getting? Because he has. If you haven't seen it, you should go to his website. He's done an exhibit of flower macros, right?
Native wildflower.
Yeah. Have you done a lot of this sort of thing, or are you doing a different?
Basically, my method was a little bit more simple, I think, than what you're doing.
Mhm.
And perhaps a little more regimented. I turned the left image to a black and white,
Mm-hmm.
turned to grayscale, copy the whole file, all 3 channels,
Mm-hmm.
and paste that into the red channel of the right image.
Oh, okay. So yeah, and that's a Puppet Kite kid. I forget his real name, but yeah, that's something he's talked about a lot.
And it seems to work in most cases.
Oh yeah, you know and that's actually I'm gonna show that, because that's a very and this does go to show that there are a lot of different ways to skin this cat. There really are. I'm just basically here just showing the ones that I've used, but if you get interested in anaglyphs and you get interested in doing this, you'll start to notice there are a lot of different ways to do it.
Save one that you've done like this, and then do the same operation, and let's see the difference.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Well, actually, let's save this one, because right here I could fiddle with it further, but I'd say this is a pretty fair. You know, I would be willing to show this to someone. If it was someone important, I might work on it a little bit longer. But so I'm gonna save this, and then we'll do that. The thing with that method, my initial recollection of when I was fiddling with it is that I didn't really like the way flesh tones came out.
No.
However, it does solve the problem. What you're doing, you're making a grayscale red channel, right?
Right.
Yeah. So and it's a lot quicker than the stuff I'm doing here. So just crop here. All right. So I'm going to call this Shelley, the Shelley version, because this is and all this stuff. I do want to make sure I give Dan credit. If he was here, he would be doing this workshop, but since he couldn't make it, I'm filling in for him. But all this business of layering things is stuff he came up with. I'm going to save this as, I'll call it Shelley glyph. That's a term we sometimes use. And you'll notice at the end of my handout, I have a list of some websites that are worth looking at. One of them is Dan's website, where he has a set of links that are amazing. He's got dozens and dozens of great links about anaglyph images. All right, I'm going to go back to the beginning here. I've clicked on my history brush and gone back to the top, and we're going to try the method Simon was describing. And tell me if I'm doing it correctly. I think I understand it. I'm going into this pair. I'm copying everything, basically, right?
Yeah.
Copying all the channels, pasting them to the red channel. So this is that correct?
Yeah, I work with separate layers,
Mhm.
essentially.
Okay.
And I make a black and white version of the left,
Mm-hmm.
paste it into the red channel of the right.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Well, you know what? That probably is the same thing, but let's just do it. Let's just do it that way, because there is a difference between a grayscale and a desaturated. The tones tend to come out differently. So when you go to here, will you just desaturate?
I
Or you convert to grayscale?
Grayscale it.
Okay.
And then I actually go back to my history and
Sure.
reverse after I've copied it.
So in other words, you're going to go in and say mode is grayscale. Actually, to really do this, I'll just do it. Yeah, don't flatten. So I'm going to copy just this gray scale. I mean, the thing with the grayscale image is there are no channels. It's literally just one thing. That's why your grayscale files will tend to be 1/3 the size of your red, green, blue ones. Now I'm going to undo that. Oh, okay. I'm going to go, I've copied the pixels, and then I'm just going to go back to the beginning, back to color mode. And then I'm going to paste this grayscale thing that I've copied in here. Now, I guess technically you did it to the left channel, but it doesn't really matter because that left channel is going anyway. So I think I've duplicated your method. And you can see what I mean about the flesh tones.
Yeah, they come up kind of pasty.
Yeah. But everything else about it is, once again, the rivalry has been greatly reduced, and you don't have to worry about layers. Although, you know what I would do if I were doing that and I was doing pictures with flesh tones is I would just put a full color layer at the top and only use the flesh tones and use the rest of this. But let's just see what this looks like for a comparison sake. And once again, make an anaglyph. Yeah, and then we'll open these up side by side and you can see you can compare one to the other. All right. And I almost caught myself forgetting which was the left side. And then, once again, I'm just going to get in a little bit closer, think about where I want to position this red channel, debating where's the most contrast, where's my main subject. The nice thing is, even with these multi-layer versions, after you flatten the image, you can go and fiddle with the positioning of this red channel further if you want to. Okay? Image, crop. And so what you're going to see here are really two different solutions to the same problem. And no doubt that's a little bit easier than, oh, I see. I need to save this as, first I think I need to save this as PKK, because the first place I heard about this was from Puppet Kite Kid. He was talking about this method. Okay. We'll put them side by side. And yeah, this if you want another quick way to do it, that method of just creating a grayscale red channel, and you can see the reason why that works so well is that you've once again gotten rid of this disparity of your colors. If that red channel is a grayscale, it no longer has that intense. And so here they are side by side.
So which one is which now?
Thanks. This one on the left is the one that was done with the grayscale red channel. This was the one that was done with the multi-layered, color shifting. For my taste, I prefer the one on the right, and I prefer this sort of more complex color mixing when I'm dealing with things like flesh tones, because making the red channel a grayscale is such a big change. It's going to tend to mess up your flesh tones, even while averaging out your colors in a very nice, handy way. But they're both perfectly good anaglyphs, and this is a very difficult image. It would be hard to find something much uglier. And you can see right away, your mind can start to come up with other approaches that you might use to this. Another thing you could do is take this approach of the grayscale red channel and just layer over it a regular color one. What I would do in Photoshop, actually I'll just do it. I'm going to come up with yet another image that was vexing me, and we'll try it a different way. All right, this one we'll close for now. But yeah, that's a very interesting comparison. And it also just goes to show, like I say, this is the art. It's not the rules of making anaglyphs, because there are any number of approaches that'll work. Now this is an image that's really a pain because most of it works fine except for those stinking traffic cones. And look at those through the glasses. I mean, it's literally like they're flashing. So I'm going to try sort of the combination here. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this. And call this full color. It's after 8 o'clock, so you're free to go, but you're also welcome to stay if you like. Just letting you know.